She left bread on the table. 2 small cups of milk set carefully beside it, the way you would if you expected someone to need them when they woke. The hallway light was on. She had left it on deliberately, so the children would not open their eyes to darkness. Then she went to the kitchen. She pressed wet towels into the gap beneath the door. She ran tape along the edges slowly, methodically, the way a person does a task they have rehearsed many times in their mind before ever doing it with their hands. She was thorough. She had always been thorough. It was one of the things people said about her, that she did everything completely, that she did not do things by half. Then she turned on the gas oven and knelt down. It was February 11th, 1963. A Monday. Outside, London was locked inside one of the coldest winters the city had experienced in a century. The street was quiet. The building was quiet. Downstairs, her neighbor was asleep. A nurse had been scheduled to arrive that morning. Someone arranged by her doctor. Someone who would have knocked on the door, who would have been standing there when it opened. The nurse wrote down the wrong address. She never came. Sylvia Plath was 30 years old. Her daughter was 2. Her son was not yet 1. If this kind of story pulls you in, the kind that feels almost unbelievable until you realize it isn't, then you'll want to stay close to this channel. We are trying to reach 1,000 subscribers before the end of this month, and the people who subscribe early are the ones who end up shaping what this becomes. And one more thing, don't just watch this silently. Tell me where you're watching from. Drop your city or your country in the comments. I read them, and it's the only way I get to see who's really on the other side of the screen. The world has a version of this story. You have probably heard it. It goes something like this. The troubled poet, too sensitive for the world she lived in, consumed by darkness she could never fully escape, who ended her life in a cold London flat as though it were simply the inevitable conclusion of who she was. It wasn't. That version is comfortable because it places everything inside her. It makes what happened a private disaster, the result of a mind that was always going to arrive at this particular morning. It compresses 6 months of concrete, external, named events into a single sad sentence and moves past them quickly, because looking at them closely requires asking questions the comfortable version does not want to answer. This is what actually happened. This is the story of a specific 6-month period. What was done, what failed, who left, and what the world did not provide in time. To understand what was lost on that February morning, you have to first understand, precisely and without mythology, what she had built. Sylvia Plath was born in Boston, Massachusetts, on October 27, 1932. Her father, Otto, was a professor of biology and German at Boston University. He was rigorous and largely sealed off from his family in the emotional sense, even when he was physically present. He died when Sylvia was 8 years old, diabetes, left untreated because he had convinced himself the symptoms indicated something less serious. By the time he saw a doctor, the infection had spread beyond what medicine could reverse. Sylvia stood at his grave at 8 years old and made herself a private promise. Her journals record it. She would not depend on anyone that completely again. She kept that promise by becoming extraordinary. She won literary prizes throughout school. She published stories in national magazines as a teenager. She earned a full scholarship to Smith College, one of the most competitive women's colleges in the United States. In her junior year, she won a guest editorship at Mademoiselle magazine in New York, a position that should have been the beginning of everything. Instead, it broke something. The pressure of performing that level of perfection cracked her at 20. A breakdown, a suicide attempt, hospitalization, electroconvulsive therapy, administered, by her own account in letters written afterward, without adequate anesthesia. She described waking during treatment. Whatever that experience did to her understanding of safety, of the people and systems meant to protect her, it did not leave easily. She recovered, returned to Smith, finished her degree, won a Fulbright scholarship to Cambridge. She did not recover in spite of who she was. She recovered because of it, because she had a ferocious, disciplined hunger for work that was real, language that named what women were not supposed to name, writing that did not perform or diminish. At Cambridge, in 1956, she met Ted Hughes at a party. He was tall, dark-haired, from Yorkshire, physically imposing in a way that entered a room ahead of him. He had already begun to publish. He was raw and certain in a way she found genuinely electrifying. Their first meeting was not passive. She bit his cheek. He kissed her hard enough to draw blood. For months later, they were married. For a time, the marriage was something real. Two serious writers who pushed each other, read to each other in the evenings, challenged each other's work with genuine engagement. Sylvia submitted Ted's first poetry collection, The Hawk in the Rain, to a competition without telling him. He won. She was not resentful. She was elated. She wrote to her mother that Ted was a genius, and she believed it with her whole chest. 2 children came. Frida in 1960. Nicholas in January 1962. She nursed them, managed the house in Devon, a large farmhouse called Court Green that she had thrown herself into with real pleasure, painting rooms, planting a garden, keeping bees. There are photographs of her during this period, gloves on, standing at the hive, calm and absorbed and present. Every morning before the children woke, she was at the desk. She was writing what would become some of the most significant poems in the English language. She was also, underneath all of it, noticing things she did not want to fully assemble. Ted Hughes was a gifted poet. That is not a concession. It is a fact that must be stated plainly, because the story cannot be told with integrity if the thing that made him compelling is erased. His work was physical, elemental, genuinely powerful. The kind of writing that convinces a reader they are encountering something true about the natural world. Sylvia believed in it completely. She had organized her life, in part, around that belief. She had typed his manuscripts, managed his correspondence, kept the household frictionless so he could work. She did these things because she loved him, and because the world they lived in had a specific word for a wife who didn't. But Ted Hughes was also, consistently and specifically, charming to other women in ways that Sylvia noticed in small pieces, and was afraid of what assembling would require. In the summer of 1962, she stopped being able to look away. A couple named David and Asha Wevel came to visit Court Green. David was a poet who had become friendly with Ted. They came into the home Sylvia had painted and planted and built. And during that visit, Ted and Asha connected in a way that was immediately, visibly more than social. After the Wevels left, a phone call came. Sylvia answered first. She recognized the voice on the other end. She ripped the telephone cord from the wall. Not as metaphor. Physically. She tore it out. There are moments in a life that function as a before and after. Suspecting and knowing are 2 entirely different countries, and she had just crossed the border with no way to uncross it. What the world did not know for decades, what sat in an archive untouched until 2017, were the letters Sylvia wrote to her psychiatrist, Dr. Ruth Barnhouse. 45 pages. Her most uncensored account of what those final months contained. In a letter dated September 22, 1962, she alleged that Hughes had physically beaten her shortly before she miscarried their second child in 1961. In a letter dated October 21, 1962, she wrote that he had told her directly he wished she were dead. She wrote that to her doctor, to the one person she trusted with the unedited truth. Dr. Barnhouse, in her own private notes, used one word to describe Ted Hughes. Evil. These are Sylvia's words, written at the time, to a person she trusted. They are the closest thing we have to her uncensored voice from those months. And they sat in an archive for 60 years while the world built its version of the story around his. Ted left in the autumn of 1962. He moved to London, toward Asha Wevel, without visible hesitation or shame. He moved the way people move when they have decided their own life requires something new and are not, in that moment, accounting fully for what they are leaving behind. 2 children. A woman alone in a large Devon farmhouse as the English autumn came in cold and gray. What came next was not one catastrophe. It was 5 separate systems failing her in close succession. Each one, alone, might have been survivable. Together, they became something else entirely. The cold. The winter of 1962 to 1963 was the worst England had seen since 1947. Later called the Big Freeze. Roads closed. Pipes burst across London. For Sylvia, alone in a flat still being set up, managing a 2-year-old and an infant. This meant a physical endurance that doesn't translate easily into words. Keeping the children warm. Managing the coal. Waking multiple times a night because Nicholas was still an infant. Rising before dawn anyway because the desk was the only place that still felt like hers. The pipes in her Fitzroy Road flat froze solid. The illness. The children caught influenza. Then she caught it, and it would not clear. A persistent fever through December, into January, into February. The specific exhaustion of someone who is ill and also not permitted to stop. Not permitted by 2 children who needed her regardless of her temperature. Not permitted by a mind already under siege. The money. Ted's financial arrangement was modest. The Bell Jar had just been published in January 1963 under a pseudonym, partly to protect people who might recognize themselves, partly because she was no longer certain she owned her own story. The reviews were respectful and indifferent. She was budgeting carefully, measuring the heating bills. She had no way of knowing that book would eventually be read by millions of women who would find their entire interior lives reflected in it. The isolation. Sylvia had friends in London, but the social structure of her life had been built largely through Ted, his circles, his introductions, his connections. When he left, that structure did not transfer. Some people would have helped if she had asked directly. But she had spent years performing capability, being the managing one, the fine one, and that performance had been believed. The flat had no telephone for the first weeks. There was no way to reach her quickly. She was not hiding. She was asking for help through the correct channels. She told her doctor, John Horder, in January that the depressive episode had been ongoing for 6 or 7 months, that it had worsened into something severe. Constant agitation, suicidal thoughts, and increasing inability to manage the mechanics of daily life. Dr. Horder prescribed antidepressants, new in 1963, requiring weeks to reach any therapeutic effect. He tried to arrange a temporary bed in a psychiatric facility. None were available in London. He tried to arrange a home nurse. This too moved slowly. She was in the system. She was doing exactly what she was supposed to do. The system was processing her request. She waited. Then Dr. Horder arranged for a nurse to come on the morning of February 11th. Someone who would arrive, knock on the door, be there. The nurse wrote down the wrong address. What this story cannot afford to lose is December. A few weeks before the end, Sylvia moved into the Fitzroy Road flat for the first time. She had found it herself, chosen it herself. When she arrived and saw the blue plaque on the exterior wall, W.B. Yeats lived here, she considered it a sign. She wrote to a friend that she felt she was meant to be in that apartment, that it had been waiting for her. The next day she went to Selfridge's department store. She bought a glass-top table, 2 chairs, several bar stools. Her checkbook stub records the exact amount, £19, 1 shilling. She had the walls painted white. She set up pine bookcases and rush matting. She arranged her desk. She wrote to her mother on December 21st, 1962. I have never been so happy in my life. Inside everything she was carrying, the failed marriage, the 2 children, the flu she could not shake, the bank account she watched carefully. She was still capable of being genuinely, unmistakably happy about white walls and a glass-top table and a blue plaque that told her a great poet had once stood where she was standing. That is who Sylvia Plath was. That is the person inside the mythology. A woman who could carry all of it and still feel the specific pleasure of a sign that the world had some intention toward her. On the morning of February 11th, before she sealed the kitchen, she left bread on the table. 2 small cups of milk. She left the hallway light burning, so the children would not wake to darkness. Not the oven. Not the towels pressed against the door. The bread. The milk. The light. She was their mother until the absolute last moment. She was taking care of them even then. That is the part of this story that belongs entirely to her. Not to the literary estate, not to the man who rearranged her manuscript and destroyed her journals and outlived her by 35 years, not to the mythology that compressed her into a single sad sentence. It belongs to her. After she died, Ted Hughes took control of her literary estate. They were still legally married. She had left no will. Everything passed to him, the manuscripts, the journals, the unpublished work, the rights to every word she had ever written. The man who left became the custodian of her voice. He edited Ariel, her final poetry collection, for the 1965 publication the world received. The version he published was not the version she had prepared. She had organized the manuscript herself, with a specific arc, a specific order, a specific reason. He changed the ordering. He removed 12 poems she had included. Among them the rabbit catcher, the jailer, the detective, poems that named what had happened, poems that portrayed him in an unflattering light, and added 12 others she had not selected. He also stated publicly that he had destroyed one of her journals covering the final years of the marriage. He said he did not want the children to read it. A second journal from the final period simply disappeared. Whatever she wrote in those pages, what she knew when she knew it, what those last months felt like from the inside, is gone. Decided for her, after she was no longer able to object. Her original manuscript of Ariel, the one she had arranged herself, was finally published in 2004, 41 years after her death. It was her daughter Frida who authorized it, after Ted Hughes died, who finally gave the world her mother's work in the order her mother had intended. In 1982, Sylvia Plath was awarded the Pulitzer Prize for Poetry for her collected works, one of only a handful ever awarded posthumously. The prize was accepted on behalf of her estate by Ted Hughes. She was not there to receive it. Her voice had spent 2 decades passing through his hands before it reached yours. The least we can do now is read her carefully. If you think that matters, you know where the subscribe button is.